Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are. Welcome to the Vegan World 2026 Moonshot podcast. And today I'm really excited to be talking to Hsiung of Direct Action Everywhere. He's the co founder of Direct Action Everywhere. And I've been following his work for many, many years. And I admire his courage and his dedication to the cause. And welcome, Wayne.
It's good to be here. It's been a while. I think the last time we hung out was in Nashville, North Carolina, right?
Yes, Asheville, North Carolina, and I came for the Animal Liberation Conference as well.
Oh, you mean this past fall?
Not the past one.
Okay.
I
So
came, I think, a couple of years ago. Yeah.
so 2019. So maybe that was the last time we saw each other. I just remember that I think it was a lunch we had with Paul Berry at Rosetta's in Asheville.
Right.
It was that place is great cornbread. The conversation was even better. It wasn't just the
Right.
cornbread that I enjoyed, but I think I remember that place having really good cornbread.
Right. Was that the time when you got into trouble for rescuing a goat? Was that after?
I don't think it was because the time I got into trouble for rescuing a goat, which I just went to trial for,
Right.
I feel like it was a mad scramble the entire time, and I don't remember being particularly stressed out when I had that lunch. And I remember meeting you after it was after the Vegan Fest, right? We both were at the Vegan
Right.
Fest in Asheville, and
Right.
then Paul had us out for lunch afterwards to talk about plans to frankly do the things you're doing now.
Right.
Get the world to take more seriously animal agriculture's impact on not just animals but the entire planet.
Right.
And it was a pretty relaxed lunch. And I think it was probably a year before I got arrested off an airplane because of an allegation, which was true, that I had taken a goat from a goat meat farm. So, but yeah, we could talk about that if you're interested.
Yeah, I mean, I want to explore the legal avenues that are open for getting this out in the open, right? So we need to uh, tell the world what is really going on.
Yeah.
That the animal agriculture industry has been hiding behind bad science, misinformation,
hmm
ag gag laws, and corrupt institutions. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
you unravel this thing, it's mind-boggling,
It
right?
is mind-boggling, and North Carolina has the broadest ag gag law in the nation that
Mm,
covers a wide variety of context. And I think it's the only state that has an ag gag law that's so bad the New York Times, which is the paper of record in this country, published an op-ed just about how bad it was. I mean,
mm,
they usually publish one or not an op-ed, an editorial, which is basically the paper's official position. And the reason these ag gag laws have been passed is because North Carolina has one of the largest factory farming industries in the entire nation. Smithfield Foods, single largest slaughterhouse, and probably the largest slaughterhouse in the world in
mhm.
Tar Heel, North Carolina, is slaughtering around 30,000 pigs a day, I think, which is an obscene number,
Mhm.
and has had huge number of human rights abuses too. I mean, allegations that they've beaten up and roughed up workers and trying to unionize, and then obviously the environmental consequences too, which you've done such great work on.
Right.
But we could definitely get into this more, but honestly, the central thing I'd like listeners to take home from thinking about how we can use the law to help animals and fight for other important causes is it doesn't matter if you're a lawyer, to be bluntly honest. That's a little bit glib in the sense that I think there are some things about the law that being a lawyer helps you with. There's a lot of
Mhm.
legalese, particular
Mhm.
procedures you might need to understand. But one of the ways that power prevents change is by using the obstacles presented by a legal system that is far too complex, just way too hard, even just in the language you use. And one of the ways to overcome that is to realize that you have power in this legal system, even if you're not professionally trained. And I
Mhm.
think that's what a lot of the work we've done, because while I am a lawyer, a lot of the activists in the Direct Action Everywhere Network are not. And they've done incredibly powerful legal advocacy and incredibly good work in the courtrooms, including in North Carolina.
Mhm.
Sorry, my cat is whining in the back.
Oh, no, no,
Buddy,
that's fine. So,
he's in his defense, he's gone through a lot of difficulty over the last couple of weeks, and he just went blind. So,
Oh no.
yeah, but he's doing a lot better today. So, hey, buddy.
Yeah, I'm sure, but his other senses are working, right? So
Yeah,
it's a little bit like the law. It's blind.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the law makes you feel that way, right? And in the
Right.
courtroom drama, you got this, typically a guy, an older guy who's wearing a black robe that you have to call him your honor. I mean, the entire system is set up to make you feel sort of powerless and make you feel like you
Mm.
have to defer to everything that's being said by these powerful individuals. And these powerful individuals are human beings just like the rest of us, and they're subject
Right.
to the same biases, the same incentives, because unfortunately in the United States most state court judges are elected, which means they have to run campaigns and get political donations and get political support in order to get into office. And that means, especially in factory farming country, a lot of them are going to be beholden to the industry and are not
Mm.
going to be willing to allow activists like you or I, for example, to talk openly about factory farms. And that's what happened in North Carolina when we went to trial
Right.
a few weeks ago.
Yeah. It's all done by design, right? So
Hmm.
it's a system that's created by design to maintain itself. So
Yeah,
that's the way I see it from a systems perspective. They're trying to stabilize their system, and their
yeah,
system is based on human supremacism
hmm,
foundationally,
yeah,
right? And then along comes white supremacism, Euro supremacism,
hmm,
male supremacism. All these things are built in.
hmm,
Um, it's sort of it's but it's built in a system where the objective is to maintain your advantage.
hmm, hmm,
You know, I mean,
yeah.
so if you dig deeper, do you look into like the whole purpose of governance itself? Do you question that in the legal system?
Yeah, I do. And I'm not one to say that we have to, radically dismantle the entire system of capitalism or Western democracy, even to
Mm.
create change for the environment and animals. I think we just have to create a pretty fundamental realignment of the system as it's currently constituted.
Mhm.
And I think there are a lot of mainstream figures who believe this too, frankly. The conservative prime minister of the United Kingdom, until fairly recently, or actually it was two prime ministers ago. Do you know this guy by the name of David Cameron?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah, David Cameron was, I mean, controversial and got into trouble because he called for a Brexit referendum that he had ultimately
Right.
lost because his own party, was too nationalistic. They wanted to separate from Europe, but he himself was more of a, cosmopolitan. He believed that Europe and the United Kingdom and frankly the world should be connected. But one of the things he's most known for in my former profession, so before I was an animal rights activist and attorney, I was an economics researcher and economics student, and um, he's very well known for being affiliated with the behavioral economics movement, which is all about how we can't just think about things in dollars and cents. When we think about the
Mhm.
human condition or the condition of this planet, there are other things that drive the actual decisions of human beings, and that's a good thing. We don't want everything to be driven by dollars and cents. But one of the things that David Cameron was known for was we need to move away from measuring our economy and our society by gross domestic product, namely how much
Mhm.
economic activity we're creating, and
Mhm.
move towards something like gross happiness product. How much well-being are we creating? How much flourishing are we creating? How many people are sick? How many people are well? How much
Mhm.
pollution is there in the environment? What is the prospect for life in future generations? I mean, these seem like much more important criteria for a good
Right.
society than how much stuff we're making, because
Right.
you can't eat money, you can't drink money, you can't breathe money. Like there's
Right.
something more fundamental that we need to be looking at. And I think if we start shifting our entire society in the direction of protecting life and flourishing
Mhm.
and not just
Mhm.
protecting industry for its own sake, protecting profit for its own sake, then animal rights is almost an inevitable conclusion. And
Right.
I think those two go hand in hand. I think that both a more rational system of social
Mhm.
organization will inevitably lead us down the path to animal rights. Because if we start caring about things like whether living beings are flourishing, then it's hard to exclude living beings like my cat or the
Right.
pig in a factory farm. And I also think the inverse is true, that until we start treating living beings with true consideration we cannot create a realignment in our political system, because
Right.
I call it the moral stress test. Is as long as our system is treating those who have no political power as mere commodities, then we
Hmm.
have not actually transformed our system in a way that is consistent with justice. So they go hand
Absolutely.
in hand.
They
We
go hand
can't
in hand.
reform our democracy without reforming our mistreatment of animals, and we cannot reform mistreatment of animals, in my view, unless we have a more fundamental realignment of our democracy.
Well, it then comes down to, the purpose of governance. Right now, it was well established during the Declaration of Independence that the purpose of governance is to protect property.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the idea of ownership of property and
Mm-hmm.
ownership of land, ownership of animals comes into play. Right? It's, do you
Yeah.
have the right to own animals? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then is our purpose of governance to make sure that your claim to ownership is protected from others
Mm-hmm.
who may claim the same ownership, right? So if
Yeah.
that's the purpose, then we are stuck in the system, right? Because the system is
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
about protecting it, and the ones who have the most property get the most protection.
Yeah. Do you know Jared Diamond's work?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So he
Collapse.
wrote this. He's a MacArthur Grant winner, which is known as the Genius Grant. He wrote this amazing book called Guns, Germs, and Steel, about
Hmm.
kind of the history of human civilization and how some civilizations became more powerful. And he makes the point that you kind of made, but not just about the U.S. government, the Declaration of Independence, but about agrarian societies more generally. That
Exactly. Yeah.
historically, governments were created to protect the powerful. That was the entire point. They needed to organize themselves in a way that they can inflict their dominance over the lesser classes. In this case, mostly human beings. And so you have like tribal chieftains across the entire world in the period starting 150,000 years ago or so, and
Mhm.
especially 10,000 years ago with the inception of agriculture and the domestication of animals, where the entire point of having governmental institutions, law enforcement, structures of power that are formalized is to
Right.
ensure that these individuals at the top could continue to extract as much power and wealth and human resources, whether it's
Right.
slaves or women or whatever, as they could from everyone else. And I think that part of what, to me, I'm not someone who, like I said, is some radical. I don't see myself as a radical anti-American person. Like, I really believe in this country, and that's one of the reasons that I do the work that I do, because I have hope. I have a lot of optimism that a lot of the
Mhm.
ideals of this country are good ones. A lot of them are not, but a lot of
Mhm.
them are beautiful, powerful principles, like the idea that we all have the right, to the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
That's an
Mhm.
important principle. But I think that around the time of the Enlightenment, and I'd say before that, because in the Eastern tradition you have, ancient Hindu and Buddhist scholars talking about the equality of all living beings,
Right.
you know, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. But in the West, especially, I think the Enlightenment was this period where, the light switch kind of went off when we realized, hey, feudalism hasn't really worked. The
Right.
divine right of kings doesn't really work. It's not just bad for some of the individuals who are on the wrong side of this power structure. It's kind of taken our entire species off a cliff. and
Right.
and that was, they called it the Enlightenment, but it's a great term, because you can almost imagine the light bulb. Like,
Yeah.
we were enlightened. There was a light bulb that went off in front of our heads, and we realized this is not a path forward.
Right.
And you have a lot of these people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Jeremy Bentham and John Locke, and
Right.
who made some really important predictions about the future of the human civilization. That if we didn't move towards a world where we gave people some more freedoms, society
Mhm.
would collapse. That if we didn't recognize that just because some individuals were different from us, and Jeremy Bentham was most prescient about this, because he wrote, 400 years ago, that there will come a day when people realize that it doesn't matter whether you're from Africa or China or from England, we're all the same. And all
Right.
that matters is whether we're going to suffer. And he said the same is true of gender. It doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man. Everybody deserves the right to be free, and everyone deserves the right to be considered in our political
Right.
system. And he made those predictions 400 years ago. Everybody laughed about him and
Right.
said, "Oh, you're ridiculous. You're saying I'm on equal planes with that Chinaman or that guy from India who are colonizing, or
Right.
the black man who we enslaved. That's ridiculous. I mean, of course, I'm so distinguished. I'm powerful. I'm like a white man in the bourgeoisie of London. You
Right.
can't put me at their level." And now we say, of course, we're at the same level. That's ridiculous. And the same is true of gender, which happened a little bit later, but the women's suffrage movement was grounded in part on the principles Jeremy Bentham wrote about in what the 1600s. But the thing that most political scientists and most political philosophers don't talk about is in that exact same paragraph, he also mentions animals.
Right.
He says
Yes.
there will come a time when we look at animals and say, can you believe that just because someone has a tail, or because they have 4 legs instead of 2, or fur on their back instead of bare skin, that we subject him to all sorts of torments? There will come a day when we realize that that is an atrocity. And unfortunately, as with many of these other struggles, whether it's the struggle against racism, the
Mhm.
struggle against sexism, the struggle against speciesism sometimes only becomes salient and urgent for the populace at large when there's a crisis.
Right.
And the Civil War, obviously, in the 20th century, there are a number of crises. At the turn of the 20th century, we had World War I and Prohibition and a lot of social tumult. Like the early 20th century was a very tumultuous time period for the American people. And
Right.
we're going through a similar time period right now with the climate. And I think that
Absolutely.
tumult, it's scary, it's dangerous. I mean, you live in Arizona, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Has
I live
climate
in
change
Arizona.
affected you all directly? Have you seen any direct impacts that are terrifying?
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
mean, it's temperatures are going through the roof in summer.
yeah, that's true.
That's, I mean, yeah, winter it looks better because it's
Yeah,
warmer, but
sure.
summer, my
Yeah,
God.
yeah,
It's and people who are houseless, and that's the other problem that's
yeah.
happening,
Oh
right? Because
God.
the prices are going through the roof again, which I think is artificially done. I mean, people are buying up houses as an investment, you
Yeah,
know, and the prices are going through the roof, so rents are going through the roof. And when rents go through the roof, people are houseless.
yeah. That's
People
terrible.
live houseless in Phoenix during summer.
Yeah, yeah. I spent some time in Phoenix because I had a case when I was a lawyer in Chicago. There was a federal case I was litigating in Phoenix.
Mm,
Um, in this place called Prescott Valley. I don't know if you know
right.
Prescott or
Uh-huh, I
Prescott
know.
Valley.
Prescott
There's like
Valley.
a hockey rink out there that was subject to litigation. I was an attorney for one of the stakeholders in that. And I remember how hot it got. And this is, 10, 15 years ago. I can only imagine. I mean, it was already scathing hot in Phoenix back then. I mean,
Right.
but honestly, I don't know if there's anywhere in the world where the impacts of climate change aren't more directly evident than in the Bay Area, because over the last few years, I think in 3 out of the last 4 years, the sky has gone red.
Mm,
It is looked at. We've gone outside and it looks like we're on the planet Mars because of all the
right.
wildfires. And
Right.
there's good evidence now showing. I think there was a study published in Science magazine
Hmm.
showing that around 50% of the wildfires are being caused directly by climate change. And in other words, if not for rising
Yeah.
temperatures and reduced precipitation driven by climate change, we would not have half of these wildfires. And
Yeah.
you know, one of these days, like the first time it happened when the sky went red. For those of you who don't know, I mean, just go Google sky red Bay Area climate change or wildfires. It was 10 a.m. in the day, and it is dark and the sky is just red, like you can barely see anything, and it really felt like you're on the planet Mars, like some sort of horror movie.
Mm,
Um, and it's difficult to watch because it's happening, and it's because there's all these particulates in the air from the wildfires that are blocking the rays of the sun.
right. Right.
And but you also know that the even the Democratic legislatures of California, which are super majorities in both the Assembly and the Senate, have done not only almost nothing to stop one of the most important contributors in the state of California, which is the animal agriculture industry. Right? We
Hmm.
have Harris Ranch in California. You've probably seen, Celeste. Have you seen Harris
Yeah.
Ranch when you're driving? Yeah,
Absolutely. Uh-huh.
which I think is the single largest CAFO in the Western United States. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think in terms of not in terms of number of animals, because cows are very large, but
Hmm.
just in terms of the amount of space that Harris Ranch has, I think it's the single
Hmm.
largest CAFO in the United States, or in the Western United States. Um, it's not only that the legislature hasn't done anything about it, the legislature has continuously passed more legislation to protect and shield the industry from scrutiny, even in California.
Right.
This is not in some sort of right wing, gun toting state like Arkansas. So, like all these liberals who, judge the North Carolinas and the Iowas of the world, which we just had cases in both of those states. But
Right.
even in liberal California, I'll give you one example. There was a law passed recently in the state of California with the California Farm Bureau support, which is the largest lobbying apparatus for the farming
Hmm.
industry in the state of California, to repeal a provision of California law that allowed people to give food and water to animals that are starving or denied access to water, right? And this is done all very secretly. No one knew about it. And
Hmm.
it's just, are you serious? This is your priority? I mean, every legislator has a limited number of bills they can try and bring forth
Right.
before the state legislature. And in a time where we're suffering from all these droughts and climate change and homelessness and economic inequality, a legislature in the state of California that was passed under the consent calendar, so none of the Democrats objected to this. It was a Republican legislature who proposed this. His name is Vincent Hsiung. I forget his last name, but
Hmm.
it was his first name is Vincent. But he passed this law under the consent calendar. Not a single Democratic legislator challenged it. And we tried to work with one of the Democratic legislator who chairs the committee through which this is passed to get him to even talk about and realize the consequences of his actions, and he was not having it. And this is one of the reasons we've been forced into the courtroom, because sometimes when the system has failed, when the incentives, as you put it, are structured in a way that prevent all the powerful people are running the show from caring
Right.
at all about an issue that is an existential issue, people have to take direct action and get into the courtroom themselves, because the courtroom for the last couple hundred years, going back to all these famous court cases, Plessy versus Ferguson, Roe versus Wade, Brown versus Board of Education, the courtroom has always been the place where Americans, and especially Americans who are ordinary citizens trying to fight for basic civil and political rights,
Right.
where we can have a voice, even if our politicians are not giving us a voice in this legal system. And so that's what we're doing.
Right. Yeah. I hear you. I hear you. But this is. But I think we are reaching the stage of the Enlightenment
Hmm.
for just like what happened in the Middle Ages, the Enlightenment, and we suddenly figured out that the sun does not go around the earth goes around the
Yeah.
sun.
Yeah.
We threw Galileo in jail for saying that, and then we
Yeah.
finally admitted he was right. Okay.
Hmm.
I say that we are facing a double Galileo moment right
Hmm.
now. Okay. It's similar to that. One is we have been taught that the pursuit of happiness is best accomplished by stoking and satisfying a never ending series of desires in human
Yeah.
beings, which is absolutely false. And
Yeah.
our entire system is based on that, right? You look at all the ads, everything is based on, yeah, to pursue happiness, you need to drink this Coke or
Hmm.
you need to eat this gum or whatever it is, right? So uh, our entire system is based on that assumption that the pursuit of happiness is through consumption. Okay, so consumerism is foundational to the system, and this is why I say, even the Declaration of Independence, right? When they said, "You all, the Creator has given you a right to life, liberty,
Hmm.
and the pursuit of happiness," and then they said, "You all have to go earn a living, otherwise you're
Hmm.
going to be houseless and you're going to
Hmm.
starve to death." Well, what happened to the right to life? Didn't the Creator give it to me? I mean,
Yeah.
did you just take it away from me? And then said, unless I do what the master wants, you're going to starve to death.
Hmm.
So it's one of those dichotomies that are built into the system because it's based on some false axioms. So the
Yeah.
first false axiom I say is the axiom of consumerism,
Hmm.
and the second false axiom is the axiom of supremacism.
Hmm.
That is, those who have gained an advantage may possess, enslave, and exploit animals, nature, and the disadvantaged for their pursuit of happiness.
Hmm.
Okay. And that is also false.
Yeah.
So these two false axioms we need to overturn. So it's like the double Galileo moment, right?
Hmm.
If we really want to survive on this planet, I mean, it's like Mother Nature is saying, are you going to wake up or do I have to kill you?
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are good axioms. I mean,
Yeah.
I believe that there's a couple of schools of constitutional theory in
Hmm.
this country, and this is among practicing lawyers. I was a law professor and pretended to do some constitutional law work when I was a law professor. I
I'm
wrote a
sure you
paper on the
did.
First Amendment, and it was never published, and it's not that good, and I failed as a law professor. But I was very interested in these subjects because I thought I was going to be a political theorist and economic theorist. I didn't think I was going to become an activist who gets arrested rescuing animals. That was my dream when I was a kid. I wanted to be a thinker. But there's two schools of constitutional theory. One is originalism. Or there's more than two schools, but you can broadly categorize constitutional theorists in two different camps. One is originalism, and Antonin Scalia is most known for this philosophy, which is the original conception of a document is what matters. So if
Right.
in 1776 or whatever year the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights is written, the people who wrote it believed that black people were not people, or that animals didn't deserve consideration, or that gay people, should be criminalized and thrown in prison, then that's the way it is. You don't have the right to change that. It's stuck the way it is. And I guess you can change it, but you have to change it by amending the Constitution, which is an incredibly difficult process. For those of you who don't
Right.
know, how hard it is to amend the U.S. Constitution. There's a reason we only have a few amendments in the U.S. Constitution. Like, I think, how many amendments are there? Maybe like 20. I should know how many amendments there are. I think there are like 27 amendments. And really, there are only 17 because the first 10 of them were passed the same time the Constitution was passed. So there have been, in this country's 250-year history, there have only been, I think it's less than 20 times where we've been able to amend the Constitution. And
Right.
just imagine your personal life. If even over a year, if you only made 20 changes in your life in 1 year, you'd be screwed. I mean, like, you can't live that way. I mean,
Right.
your car breaks down, you got to get a new car. Your job sucks, you got to find a new job, or you get sick, you've got to take a different medicine. You can't just live your life with only 20 changes over a 20-year time period or 200-year time period. So to me, that theory is not just politically unsound, because you have to change, right? But secondly, I don't think it's consistent. Ironically, originalism is not even consistent with the founders' own interpretation of the document. The best example of this is Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was known for saying, we almost need a new constitution every generation. Every generation should
Right.
pass a new founding document, because we're limited people. I mean, he was a great example of this, because he was
Right.
someone who wrote about how he was against slavery, and he had slaves himself, right? And we see
Right.
this in the context of animal rights too. I think there's so many people who believe in animal rights, but of course, in their personal practices, maybe they're not entirely consistent with it. And partly for that reason, Jefferson said, I am a limited human being. So are the other founders. Don't venerate us the way they become venerated, but recognize our failings too, by passing a new constitution every generation. But the better approach, because especially given how difficult it is to amend the Constitution, you need to basically impanel like a constitutional convention in every state. There are a couple of ways of doing it. I won't go into all the boring details, but it's just, suffice it
Right.
to say, it's very hard. The better way to affect that same objective
Mhm.
without going through this very convoluted process is by understanding the Constitution is a living document, right? It's a set of principles, and it's not a specific recipe for something we can bake up in the oven. It is a set of principles, right?
Right.
That adapt and live. And probably Lawrence Tribe at Harvard, who incidentally has been a supporter of animal rights and wrote an amicus brief on behalf of Happy the Elephant in New York.
Mhm.
So Steve Wise and the Non-Human Rights Project has been litigating these cases in New York, trying to argue that an elephant is a person. That
Mhm.
this elephant who's been trapped in a cage is not just a thing. It's not like a chair that you can throw into a closet and just leave them there forever. This is
Right.
a living being that was kidnapped from Africa, brought to the United States, and forced to live in this cage for human amusement. That's not right. You have to provide some legal grounds for why you're denying this living creature that is an autonomous being capable of suffering and joy, capable of having social connections to their family members. How do you justify holding them in a cage? And Larry Tribe, the constitutional law professor at Harvard, wrote an amicus brief in support of this and said, yes, these are sound legal and common law and even constitutional principles. And Larry Tribe wrote that brief because he believes in the living Constitution, that there are certain fundamental principles this Constitution has enshrined.
Mhm.
The idea of equal protection of the law, right?
Right.
The 14th Amendment. What
Mhm.
does that mean? Well, it's evolved to mean many, many things that the founders never would have thought. So, for example, it's evolved to extend to sexual orientation in a time where sexual orientation was not even something anyone thought was an issue, right?
Mhm.
It's evolved to extend to slaves, right? This is what the 13th and 14th Amendment were passed for. So we could extend equal protection of the law to people who formerly were just property. And and it even extended to things like school segregation, right? And
Mhm.
Brown versus Board of Education. Equal protection of the law means you cannot deny someone access to a school simply because of their race. And Tribe's view is the one that I think lives most
Mhm.
prominently, not just within legal academics, but even among judges. That's changing a little bit. Like the current Supreme Court is 6-3, and there's, I don't want to get into like the politics of the situation because I think the country
Right.
has become
Mhm.
far too politicized, and I think we have to win over Republicans. But there's also some truth to the idea that, at least on certain issues, and in some areas, it's harder to win over Republicans. It just is. And
Mhm.
that's true of the Supreme Court and equal protection. If we're trying to make an equal protection argument that extends to animals in the Supreme
Right.
Court, you know, the the John Roberts and the Neil Gorsuches of the world are going to be a lot harder to win over than, say, Elena Kagan,
Right.
generous. So I hear your point about the fundamental defects in our Constitution,
Hmm.
and I would respond by saying even the founders recognized this themselves and said, "Let's evolve."
Right.
And now we're at a point where we evolve or we die.
Right. We evolve or we die. So it brings me to the original idea of the right to life given
Hmm.
to us by our Creator.
Hmm.
Okay. Could we then go and argue we've been given a right to life, which means we are entitled to have clean, pure water. We are entitled to have uh, pure food, healthy food, nourishment available to us. So that is the original intent of this right to life, right? And so we are governing ourselves to make that available to everybody. You
Yeah,
know, so that's
I
an
love it.
well, I mean, would you support that kind of interpretation, and then going after the way it's being interpreted now, which is everyone, you don't own this home, you have to be out on the street and starve to death. What the heck?
Yeah, I would 100% support that. I think that there is, you know, the common critique people give to the idea of a living constitution that we
Mm,
should be evolving and for example creating a right to continued existence and a right to life for the living
mhm,
beings of this earth is that, well, that is disorder, you know, that no one can ever know what rights we have if
mhm,
we're constantly inventing rights. And if we can invent rights, we can also take them away. That there's something really powerful about just having a document that sets out very clearly and that does not allow anyone to change what rights we have and also what rights we don't have.
mhm,
And my I think my response to that is not just that, you know, what I said earlier, that you have to make some changes because otherwise, even as an individual, everything's going to fall apart. You have to adapt to the situation you're facing. But there is a difference between evolutions like the one you're suggesting, that we should be basically, from natural law perspective, inserting a right to life and
mhm.
saying, you know, all living beings deserve at least the right not to be slaughtered
Right.
and turned into something and then have their existence ended unnaturally just because someone else wants to use them. But there's a difference between rights like that and other rights we might inject or deny that
Mhm,
are intended to protect powerful people. So, you know, like Citizens United, a very famous Supreme Court case that gave corporations the right to spend freely in political elections, for example.
right.
That is an extension. That was an expansion of the First Amendment in this country. That was an expansion that had the impact of securing more power for the powerful, to reinforce, you know, the largest and most influential corporations in the world. And I think one of the almost meta principles of the U.S. Constitution that is an important one is this idea that the U.S. Constitution sees all men as created equal, right? That we rights that are extended to further that more basic principle that, you know, all men at the time, but obviously we now believe it's not just men, but it's men of different races. It's men and women. When we said
Mhm,
men, we really meant human beings. And I think
mhm.
eventually we'll evolve to include non-human animals and other sentient beings in this
Right.
conception of a person. But there's a difference between rights that are being created that equalize the playing field more and ensure the powerless are
Mhm,
given a fair shake, and rights that do the opposite, that reinforce the exploitation of the weak, that give power to the powerful, right? So like
right.
Citizens United giving power to the Smithfields of the world, the Facebooks of the world, the
Mhm,
Exxons and the Chevrons and the Tysons and the Cargills of the world, because those are the corporations whose rights are expanding. In a case like Citizens United, well, in a case like Brown versus Board Education, you're fighting for the black schoolgirl who just wants to go to school. You know,
right.
this is not a powerful person who's trying to expand their power to subjugate others. She's just trying to get an education. So
Right.
I think the way we can distinguish between these two different types of evolution is, and I'm not saying there aren't going to be factual disputes, because there are going to be situations where it's not clear which category a
Mhm,
particular proposed evolution lands in.
Hmm.
But conceptually, there are two distinct types of evolution of constitutional law, or even just common law, which is the
Hmm.
system under which we operate in the United States and for most of the English speaking world, which is a system of law where judicial decisions have the weight of law. The judges have as much power as legislators in a lot of way for determining what the law of the land is. We can categorize these two different types of expansions of rights by under common law or constitutional law.
Right.
One is rights that are evolving to protect the vulnerable and the powerless, and the second
Mhm.
is rights that are expanding to reinforce the power structures. And the
Right.
first category is consistent with basic constitutional principles in this country. The second category is a violation of those same constitutional principles, including the idea that all living beings are created equal.
Right. Yeah.
So,
So,
so
but
we got to
then,
find a way to do it.
yeah, we have to find a way to do it. But then
Yeah,
we have living in a system, right, where we have monetized everything. We're trying to monetize everything
yeah,
so that when dead trees have more economic value than living trees, we chop down trees. When
hmm,
dead animals have more economic value than living animals, we kill the animals. And when sick people have more economic value than healthy people, we deliberately sicken people. I mean, look at the U.S. Department of Education now has a adopt a cow program in schools, you know,
hmm.
and they know that consuming dairy is going to sicken people. I mean,
Yeah,
especially people of color, right? They know
yeah,
that. This is established science. We know that, right?
yeah,
And yet they do it. Why? Because it makes more money. They've
hmm,
monetized it. They've monetized our bodies, right? So
yeah,
there's more diseases that will come if you consume that.
yeah,
And so to me, the entire system is being questioned right now. And nature is saying, do you want to continue with this deceptive system? If you want to, I'll kill you. It's
yeah,
simple. I mean, she has consequences for our actions, right?
yeah,
And so, how do we evolve quickly enough, with the old model, right? So, basically, the old model is foundationally like that, right? So, I mean, I went to a supermarket here and I bought organic brown rice for $2 a pound. And then I traced it back to the woman who grew that in Orissa, in
hmm,
India. And
hmm.
and she got 5 cents a pound. I mean,
Wow.
she actually not only grew the rice, she actually had to pay for milling it.
Yeah,
And then she got 5 cents a pound. Okay. So the rest was siphoned from her.
hmm,
So we have a system that systematically steals from the poor to enrich the rich.
yeah,
Okay. So how do you then uh, do an equal protection
hmm,
clause kind of argument around, in a system like that, right? You're questioning the
yeah,
entire system at that point. Are we
yeah.
not?
It's tough. We are questioning the entire system, and I I think the key thing is, and this is actually goes back to what I said at the start, that you have power regardless of whether you're a lawyer. I mean, the way the way corrupt laws work is not primarily through enforcement;
Hmm.
it's through fear, right? And this goes back to the theory of law itself. You know,
Mhm.
there's an English jurisprudential scholar. Jurisprudence is a fancy term that basically means your theory of law. What is law? I mean, not many people ask this, but and even in law school, you go to law school, you just learn what the laws are. You don't ask the question unless you go and take a jurisprudence class, which I did because I was interested in these sort of theoretical questions, like what is law? And there's a theorist by the name of John Austin who said, a couple hundred years ago, law is just a command backed up by force
Right.
that is habitually obeyed. So if
Mhm.
someone commands you, like, so if Celeste, you come to my house and say, Wayne, you're gonna cook me dinner, and I got a gun, and you're gonna do it, or I'm gonna shoot you in the head. Under John Austin's conception, that's law. The
Right.
only addition that needs to happen is it has to be habitually obeyed. So if you came to my house every morning and you kept doing it, eventually you wouldn't even have to bring your gun. You just come and say, like, Wayne, I didn't bring my gun today, but I'm at your house. I've got a gun. You're gonna cook me breakfast. Go cook that rice right now. And I'll be like, all right, I'll do it. As long once I habitually obey it and I'm just doing it just as a matter of habit,
Right.
that's when it becomes law. And that's a very terrifying, but honestly authentic conception of what law is, in a
Mm.
lot of contexts. And there's another scholar by the name of H.L.A. Hart, also an English scholar. And unfortunately, I'm trained in an American system, so I'm sure there are Buddhist and Hindu scholars who
Right.
came up with similar, because I think these insights extend beyond the English system. I think they extend to just the nature of human power and politics. But
Right.
H.L.A. Hart added an additional element. He's an English philosopher from, I think, the early 20th century. And he said, it's not just enough for it to be a command backed up by force that is habitually obeyed. It only becomes law, and this is the key point that I want to raise, when the person on the other side starts to accept it. Once the person accepts it and says, okay, not only, because if every day you come back and ask me to, by the way, Celeste is one of the nicest people in the world. She would never do such a thing to me. I'm just using it as a dumb example.
Thank you.
If you go to law school, there are always like dumb hypotheticals that your law professor will bring. And I've not been able to extract all the dumb hypotheticals from my being, even though I am 15 years away from being a failed law professor. I still use dumb hypotheticals. So Celeste would never come to my house. I doubt. Have you ever fired a gun? Have you ever had a gun?
No.
So Celeste is the last person in the world who would come with a gun and force you to make him a meal. But let's just finish the hypothetical and say, if every day you come back and I'm only making you rice because I'm afraid, right? And because I think, oh, Celeste could shoot me. Then the moment I obtain information, so let's say, my dog Oliver, who's behind me, you probably can't see it. Let's say my dog Oliver comes to me and says, now Oliver can't talk the way humans can talk, but he can talk. He can communicate
Right.
with me.
You can communicate.
And he says, yeah, he comes and whispers in my ear. He says, hey, Wayne, I think Celeste lost his gun. I don't think he's got a gun anymore. Then I would stop making you dinner, because I just say to myself, Celeste, Oliver just told me you don't have a gun anymore. You got nothing on me. I'm not going to make you dinner. You can't force me to do this. So it's routine obedience that's still based on a fear that once that fear is dissipated, it's gone. And H.L.A. Hart points out that no, things become law when it's no longer, it still has to be a command backed up by force. It still has to be Celeste just coming to my house with a gun. But the key point is, once I start accepting that fear and saying, this is just the state of the world, that I have to allow Celeste to come into my house and force me to make him dinner, because that's just the way the world is. I've internalized it, right? And so the fear becomes almost a part of my life. I realize that at any point, Celeste could hurt me, so I have to make him dinner. And I think the way you move fast enough to overcome that is for all of us collectively to realize that we don't have to live under that fear. Right. So, and that's true of the fear you have to make changes in your personal life. Some people are scared. It's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do if I can't eat cheese every day? It's like, you're going to be fine. I promise you. Like I was such a meathead. All I ate was meat. Oh, there he is. Can you see Oliver now?
Yeah, we see him.
Yeah. Oliver's whispering. You're not gonna keel over and die. I'm 40 years old. I just got mistaken for a 20-year-old at a basketball game a couple days ago. Seriously, I'm 40 years old, and this kid who's in college said, like, oh, what, because this is a basketball game that's a pickup game in Berkeley. I don't play basketball very often, by the way. I just got invited actually by Indian friend Taj, who's a Berkeley law student. But this is a pickup game that has like older folks, younger folks, all sorts of people come and play. It's a ton of people. And a Cal student who was like a 20-year-old, he said, like, oh, what are you majoring in? And he said, I was a college student. He said, you must be 20. And I'm like, I'm literally twice your age, my friend. And I'm, I've been eating vegan for the last 20 plus years, and it's fine. Like I'm alive. I'm not only alive, I'm thriving, I'm doing well. So it's the fear about changes to our diet. It's fear about changes to our social structure.
Right.
Can I go to the same restaurants? It's fear about changes to our politics, to our economics, all these things. But we have to realize that we don't have to be afraid. All the things that corporations and our society tells us we can't do, and it's too hard, and it's going to be too challenging, and it's going to cause these problems, and people are going to lose their jobs. Let's just look at the world from an objective perspective and look at the pros and cons of some change. And if the change is the right one, let's do it. Let's not be held back unnaturally by all these irrational fears about what change is actually about. And, who can argue against a change like the one you suggested? Let's create a change where all the living beings have a basic interest in their own lives that's protected by law.
Right.
Who can argue with that? Who is going to argue with that? Even
Right.
animal agriculture people, when you frame it that way, and it is the right way to frame it. It's just objectively what you're asking for. How
Right.
can you argue against that from a legal perspective? And the difficulty is people don't even want to have the argument because they're scared. So
Right.
we have to overcome that fear. And that's a huge part of what DXC was intended to do when we launched this project in
Hmm.
2012. Let's
Hmm.
let's give people the power and confidence they need to speak their truth, even if their voice shakes. That's one of my favorite quotes. I don't even know who it's a quote of, but there's this quote that's used in activist circles very often. Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. And the more
Right.
you do that, the less your voice is going to shake.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, we have internalized. This is a BJ's Rebecca Allen
Hmm.
said here. We have internalized laws that make us participate in the killing of animals. You know,
Yeah, it's
and
very
it is.
true.
Yeah.
That's cool. How did we even get that? This is on Facebook Live? I think I didn't even realize that.
This is StreamYard. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Well, thanks,
Yeah.
Rebecca. That's awesome. And you're right. We've internalized these laws. We've just said this is just the way things are, and it doesn't have to be. It's so easy to change.
Yeah.
You got to believe in it, though.
You have to believe in it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Believe in. Have you seen Codes for a Healthy Earth?
I
Codes for a
haven't. Is this
Healthy
part of Vegan World 20? Is it 2025, 2026?
2026. 2026.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We've adopted that. So, but
Cool.
I'll send you a link to it.
Yeah, please do.
It's beautifully said. It's the work of Dr. Shelley Ostroff,
Hmm.
and she basically comes at it from that principle that the only legitimate purpose of governance is to protect and cultivate the health and vitality of the planet
Hmm.
and all its inhabitants for generations to come.
Love it.
Yeah, it's
Love it.
simple stuff, and everybody agrees. And they read
Yeah.
that, they say, "Of course, that makes sense."
Yeah. And political scientists who study government from a scientific perspective would agree too, because the there was actually somebody, I don't think he won the Nobel Prize because I think he died before doing this, is a political scientist who was going to win the Nobel Prize in economics until he died. I'm completely forgetting his name, but he's known for studying what's called the collective action problem, right?
Hmm.
And the idea of a collective action problem, the classic example of this is there's a well in the village, and you know everybody kind of shares an interest in the well, and everyone's got to work together to protect it. But there's a collective action problem, and that, like, well, who's going to maintain the well, make sure it doesn't get dirty, because it's a
Right.
joint resource. We all benefit from it, so it's easy to engage in what's called free riding. Like, I'll just
Mhm.
sit back, and if somebody pees in the well, or if there's a hole in the well that's leaking all the water, I'm gonna let somebody else do it, because everyone benefits from the well, so somebody else will step up. But that kind of makes everyone sit back and say, like, no, I'm just going to be a free rider. I'll just be
Right.
like
Uh-huh.
the guy who's hitching a ride in this wagon, and let's hope someone
Right.
else fixes the problem. The problem with that is that everybody's in that same position, and so no one does it, even though everyone would benefit. Everyone clearly, if there's a leak in the well, it's going to lose all the water, and we're all going to die of dehydration. Somebody's got to fix that well, but
Right.
we all sit back and free ride. And so you know, the theory, and actually I'm going to look this guy up. Power. I can't believe I forget his name. I'm so far away from theory.
Well,
So the theory among political scientists is Manker Olson. That's his name. Manker Olson was a political scientist at the University of Maryland. I don't
mm,
think he won the Nobel Prize, but he probably would have,
well,
because
Eleanor
someone.
Ostrom won it, for her work on the common.
Yes, Eleanor Ostrom too. She was, I think, the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics.
Right.
But
Yeah.
Manker Olson just points out that the frankly, one of the most fundamental, and maybe the fundamental roles of government, is to solve that collective action problem. When there's
Exactly.
some joint resource that we all benefit from, including our entire planet, we need some way to govern its usage.
Right.
So the historical and the anthropological origin of governance was exploitation. This is Jared Diamond's argument in Guns, Germs, and Steel. You had a chieftain who said, hey, I want everything. I'm not happy just with
Right.
like my tent and my wife and my kids and my resources. I want everything. So I got to create some structure to basically internalize the fear. Like, and maybe I'm a big guy, so I can beat you all up, but I
Yeah.
need to, but if I'm a big guy beating people up, I can only beat one person up at a time. But if I have a governance structure, I can create enough fear that all of you are constantly in fear of being beaten up. So
Right.
as Austin points out, it's a command backed up by force.
Right.
But we need to evolve from that form of governance to the Manker Olson, Eleanor Ostrom form of governance, which is about what you said, which is we have some collective resource. We need to organize or it's going to be exhausted. We cannot sustain ourselves if everyone's just kind of doing it on their own. If everyone's a free rider. So
Right.
let's work together to make sure that resource is preserved in a way that will protect not only us, but future generations as well.
Yeah.
And yes, that is one of the shifts in governance that has to occur, away from extractive methodologies and principles
Mhm.
towards collaborative ones. And if we do that, then we can save the planet.
It is.
Well,
It's beautifully said, Wayne. I mean, it's to me, on the planet, it's not just us, right? There are lots of other beings on the planet, all these other species that are living, and every one of them seems to know how to behave in the collective sense.
yeah,
The only free rider is Homo sapiens.
yeah.
I mean, human
No,
beings, right?
that's a great way to put it, because
Yeah,
we are very extractive. We
yeah,
take from other animals, we take from ecosystems, and we leave them completely ravaged and then
right,
depart. And unfortunately, our superpowers is our ability to adapt, so we can go from one ecosystem to the next. But when we've populated the entire planet with 7 billion human beings, we cannot jump to another planet. You know,
right,
at least at this point. And I almost wouldn't want us to, unless we've changed our philosophy, because we don't want to jump from one planet to the next. Eventually, at some point, we will get to a point where we can't jump planets. And at this
right.
point, we can't jump even one planet. And we shouldn't. We should just build a form of governance that is more collaborative. By the way, the name of the
Exactly.
book, which is an amazing book, it's called The Logic of Collective Action by Manco Olson, published in 1965. And I still think, and it's funny, the subtitle of the book is A Theory of Groups, Public Goods and the Theory of Groups.
Ah,
But when I read that book, and I read this book a long time ago when I was in economics graduate school, uh, it's really not a theory of groups; it's a theory of governance.
mm,
This is the nature of good governance. Why do we need governance? Because there are some times where the public needs to collaborate
right,
and not engage in conflict.
right. Beautiful, beautiful. I'll make a note of that. In
Yeah.
fact, please email me the details, and I'll go read that up.
I think it might be a really boring book with a lot of math, but you're an engineer anyways, right? Are you a
Yeah,
software engineer? Yeah. So you'll like the math. I mean, there's some math in
I
there.
love the math.
Okay. Okay, good.
Yeah,
So for those of you who don't like math, there's better versions of it, but for Celeste, I can send you the book
yeah.
with the math.
I've read Eleanor Ostrom's book, and
Okay.
she's kind of updated it, I guess, for the
Uh-huh.
20th century, 21st
Cool.
century.
Yeah.
I met Eleanor Ostrom actually in 2011,
Oh, that's
just before
awesome.
she passed away. Yeah,
Oh, that's a bummer. I
yeah,
actually didn't even realize that she had passed away.
yeah. She passed away in 2012, I think. Yeah, year
Mm,
after I met her, she passed away.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, she had come to India. She was given an award in India.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very cool. Very cool.
Well, uh, thank you so much for this conversation, Wayne.
Sure,
You
my pleasure.
you opened a lot of vistas for us, and I'm sure uh, everyone is appreciative.
Yeah,
Tammy
my
actually
pleasure.
asked one question. Maybe I'll put that up, and then you can address that.
Sure.
So, Tammy is asking, do you feel that whole food plant-based increases our resiliency and helps us to relieve grief so we may move forward along with our communities?
That is a good question. Um, I think there's a lot of evidence for the whole foods plant-based diet. I am not one to make the strongest claims about veganism,
Mhm.
partly because I think it's actually possible to eat a pretty healthy diet and not be vegan. Um, so, for example, you can eat a whole foods plant-based diet that's not vegan, right? It's plant-based, but it's not entirely vegan, and you'll be very healthy if you're eating, organic fish and that sort of thing. The question of resiliency, I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't looked at any
Mm.
data to suggest one way or the other whether whole foods plant-based diets creates resiliency for grief. What I do think creates resilience around grief is a couple things. One is, I blogged about this recently because I've lost a lot of loved ones. I lost my
Mm.
dog, my cat's super sick. He might be going fairly soon. And it's been honestly, it's been really hard. But the number one thing that from one of my research, and I've researched this a lot because I last 10 years have been really hard for me. I lost my mom. I've lost two
Mm.
dogs and two cats.
Mm.
And these are my beloved family members. Like these are, I'm at a point when you're 40 years old and you're going to start seeing people you love die. I'm sure Celeste, you've gone through this too.
Yeah, yeah.
You're a little older than me, like maybe a year or two older than me. I don't know exactly, but
I'm
right, 41.
62, Wayne.
See, Selesh is another example of how veganism will make you immortal. Look at him. He looks like he's. I look like I'm 20. Selesh looks like he's 40. So we're 60. We're all gonna look. When we're all 80, we're gonna look like we're 60. But anyways, but the research on grief shows that you have to turn grief into something good. Like you have to remember the good things. You have to. So for me, when I think about Lisa, my little Lisa's a dog I died. I blogged about her death because it was really bad death, and she taught me a lot of really important lessons. But remember Lisa, I remember all the beautiful things she brought me in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also have kind of tried to turn her death into something that has purpose. So, one of the things I'm planning to do, I made a commitment to Lisa that I'm going to write a book by the end of the year. And I'm actually behind, and I'm not doing a very good job. I actually had a deadline today that I was supposed to finish the first draft of the first chapter, and I'm not done with it. So I feel very bad. But, one of the ways you can make sure you improve when you're failing is being open about your failings. And I did fail today. I'm not done with the first draft. But I will finish the book at the end of the year. And so when you make these sorts of positive commitments and have these positive memories, and that's true of political grief too. If
Right.
you can see the desperate state the world's in right now, and look at all the dying species and say, man, we're all screwed. It's over. And you're not going to be able to overcome that grief. You're not going to be resilient. If in contrast, you look at all these terrible things that are unfolding and still find the opportunity in them, that's when you'll be resilient. So that's the first thing I'll say. Like you have to turn grief into something good. As hard as that is, you have to turn grief into something good. And that's as simple as even having like an image. If it's a particular person who died or a species that's going extinct. Polar bears, for example, over the last, I think just 6 months ago, there was a scientific study published in some prominent peer-reviewed journal showing they are committed to extinction, that on our current path, all the polar bears will be gone from the face of the planet Earth, I think within 20 years. Fairly short time span, which is terrifying. And that creates grief in a lot of us because we don't want to see a world where the species,
Right.
especially these beautiful species like polar bears, are gone. But if we just think about how terrible it is they're going to go extinct, we'll never fight for them. And we will not be resilient in the face of the adversity we'll have to face to effectively fight for them. So I always try to go back to like a video of what polar bears are that I remember about that makes me want to fight for them. So, like for me, that's always the interactions between families. Like when I see a mother polar bear with her cubs, caring for them so gently. And these mother polar bears, they starve themselves essentially for huge amounts of time to make sure they have the milk. They go out and they eat and they swim for like these long periods of time. And they do so much. They work so hard for their babies. And that's a beautiful thing worth fighting for. It's not a terrible thing I'm trying to avoid. It's a beautiful thing I'm fighting for. So that's how you turn grief into something good. But the second piece of this is, and this has been really hard in the pandemic, is social connection. That resilience comes from connection. If you are alone, you're not resilient. No man or woman or animal even, well, there are some animals that are islands because, like a wolverine, this is a solitary species. But for us as a species, our nature is to be connected to others. So if you're alone, find connection.
Right.
And that means that's not always easy. It's because it means you have to stomach differences of opinion. It means you have to, understand that there are going to be times when you're connecting with others where they hurt you and you have to still stay connected to them. But that's crucial to stay connected. And I need to take a lesson myself because I've been spending way too much time alone in my home just writing things. So,
Well, I'm glad you're here, Wayne. I mean, this
yeah, this is
is
a
a
form of
social
connection.
connection that's happening
It
here.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And that's
Yeah.
important for resilience.
Thank you for that answer. That's such Tammy's grateful.
Yeah, and thank you for the question, Tammy. I really appreciate it, and I imagine you're fighting for the world to be a better place. I appreciate your efforts in that regard. So keep it up, Tammy. You're awesome.
Yeah. Well, keep it up, Wayne. You are awesome. So thank you very, very much for being here.
Sure.
Any last words before we end the broadcast?
Right back at you. We've known each other for years. You are one of the few people on this earth who's more ambitious than DXE has been. And I think, there's good evidence on this. Ambitious goals are good, and because we just don't have time, we've got to move the timelines up. So thank you for pushing the envelope and setting that bold vision for us all, because we need that and the world needs it.
Thanks, Wayne.
My pleasure.